Greetings. Welcome to another episode of Dear Rach and Soph with my co-host.
Rachel Johns. Hi, Sophie. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I am Sophie Green. Rachel and I have been doing this for almost, well, kind of not almost 2 years, I guess, technically on the calendar, but this is season three. So
Yeah,
maybe I'm just going to pretend it's almost
3 years.
2 years. We have, in fact, we have quite a few episodes already banked at the time we're recording this. So I'm
Yeah.
feeling like we're impresarios now or something like that.
Hey, so maybe by the time we listen to this, we'll have finished writing our new books that we're about to start.
Well, look, one can only hope, right? Because we both have deadlines.
Uh,
Why don't you tell me about the book you're planning to start?
well, I'm starting my next general women's fiction, which is going to be the only book I have out next year, I think, assuming I manage to get it done in time. I don't want to say too much about it, but it is kind of something different for me in that it's got a bit of a sliding doors element. So there are going to be two timelines. Well, technically it's the same time, if you know what I mean, like because it's like sliding doors where it's two different opportunities that could happen to this person, and we're going to follow her in each direction.
Hmm.
Um, so I rewatched Sliding Doors. I read Taylor Jenkins Reid's Maybe in Another Life, and I've got a few just to see how other people have done this. I've got my
Yeah.
kind of plot idea, but I don't have a beginning. So that
Right.
kind of, I'm hoping this week is going to be my kind of thinking and writing notes about character and all that kind of stuff. So I'm hoping that when I'm writing notes about the character, I will work out how it's supposed to start because I don't really feel like I'm the person that can start writing until I actually have an idea of what the beginning is. But I have a deadline, so I'm going to try and tell myself because I worked out in the editing that I've just done for the Lucky Sisters, which comes out this year. Although I am quite a slow writer these days, and people might roll their eyes and think, "Oh, I can't be because I've got a couple of books out a year." But I am slower than I used to be in terms of getting that draft down, and that's because I think a lot more about everything, I think. But I realized I still end up, you know, making a lot of changes and editing once I've got to know the characters and I've had feedback and stuff. So I'm kind of trying to tell myself, really just get it down. We'll see how that works.
Mm.
Anyway, but I think you're starting a new book too, hey?
I am. I should have started already. But before we go to that, I'm actually interested with your previous novels.
Hmm.
How have you started? Like, is there a particular process where you just sort of sit down in front of the computer and think, okay, I'm going to look around my room and see if there's inspiration? How have those other things?
I'm just thinking about the last few because I can't remember much further.
I
Um,
understand.
but like, I think with the Lucky Sisters, which is the most recent in my mind, because I'm still copy editing that. I've got my actually iPad on my desk, which I've been copy editing on,
Yeah.
doing a read through, and I knew again the premise. I think what comes for me is the premise, then the characters, and in there sometimes I know like how it will start. So like I've often been thinking about an idea for some time, and this one I actually haven't. It kind of came to me pretty quickly, only about a month ago, I think.
Right.
And so that's possibly why I haven't, got it ready yet.
Yeah.
Um, and um, anyway, sorry, I'm just distracting myself.
That's all right. And I was actually, so here we are, listeners slash viewers in real time. I was putting focus on my computer while Rach was talking because I realized that I hadn't done it. And if I don't do it and someone calls or texts, then you might hear the noises and everything. So Rach and I were both distracted. But
Yes. So then maybe that's why I haven't, got the idea. But usually, like, with the Lucky Sisters, I had a vague idea of what the whole plot was about, and then sometime while I was thinking about that, before I was having to actually start, the idea for the first chapter dropped into my head. With the other Bridget, similar. I just one day, it was about a couple of months before I was supposed to start. I was actually in Melbourne. I remember exactly where I was in a hotel room, and I just had the idea for the first chapter, and I actually wrote a little bit of that and then put it aside for. So I knew exactly how that was going to start. So I do like I've never started a book, like started writing, not actually knowing how the beginning. I don't know what's going to happen loads out after
yeah.
that, but yeah, yeah. What about
And
you?
so, because at the time we are recording, you only have a couple of episodes out of Mount Mary Glen, which is your
Yeah,
serialized novel, and it's reading. Like, for those of you who are listening and haven't signed up to
I have no
Rach
idea what
Substack,
Sophie's talking about.
please go to Pink Ink by Rachel. Or actually, your profile because it's a separate
Yeah.
newsletter, and you will find that there's a paid version of the Substack where you can get a serialized novel. How did that one start?
Yeah, interesting because that one I definitely didn't think much about because I am trying to have that as an interactive experience with the people who are paying subscribers. So I started the interactive experience, which I think we talked a little bit about this before this podcast, at our book club retreat, where I asked people what they want to see in a real romance from me. And from that, I came up with this, town and this idea. So it's an interesting experiment because I'm actually trying to only write like 1,000 to 1,300 words a week and then not, you know, think about it until the next week. So tomorrow's my day to write my Mount Marygold stuff. And yeah, I'm not really sure what happens next, but it feels like it's just an experiment and a different project. How did it start with that? I just started. I think I just got like a line in my head though that did set me off with something about, Mount Marygold. I think it's like every small town, but also entirely unique. And kind of then, so because I had that line from there, I'm just checking that was the line. From there, then I
think that was the line
I
from
think it
memory.
was something like that. And that,
Yeah.
so what happens to me is that I'd been thinking a week or so only. It wasn't long before I'd announced it and people had started subscribing. And then I was sort of thinking, how it would start. I had a title for the place and not much else. Yeah, it says Mount Marygold's like every small Aussie town you've ever known, tight-knit, gossipy, and with a precarious balance of charm and chaos, yet somehow also entirely unique. So that was a great starting point for me because then I just basically described the town. And that sounds boring, but I kind of gave a voice to the town, I suppose. And yeah, so I do like a first line or, you know, some situation to start. But I have faith, trusting the magic, that will come in the next few days to a week.
Well, Ray, it might come now because I'm about to give you a line.
Oh, getting my pencil down. Got it. Yeah.
The news agency had seen better days, but she'd been coming to it since she was a child, and she wasn't going to stop buying her lotto tickets from it now.
Ooh. Okay.
It's just right off the top of my head, so I have no idea what the storyline is, but there you go.
Interesting because it's not from the point of view of the character who buys a lotto ticket, but that's a good, yeah, I like, anyway, that's good. Thank you.
And also not complete, like you could say the news agency had seen better days. The paint was peeling off the walls. You can
Yeah. Love it.
So listeners / viewers, that was some live prompting there.
Yeah. But you're starting a book too, which I'm super excited about because we're actually going to be writing a novel at the same time as each other. It sounds
That's
like.
true. So I haven't started it yet, but it's very much in my mind. And because I'm going to use a slightly different device in it, I'm actually going, so there are going to be some little fragments throughout it. And I think I'm going to write the fragments first. So it's just, so the fragments are going to be not from a character's point of view. They're going to be like an omniscient narrator. And
so we're both playing a little bit with structure and form.
Yeah, so I thought I'd write those first and then I have them. And then I can, because there's not going to be no order to them, they're self-contained. So it's like, okay, well then they exist and then I can do whatever I want with them. And meanwhile, the characters' stories are very much lurking. And also because it's set in the suburb I live in, basically every day of my life is research and I grew up here.
That's great.
So
I haven't actually decided where mine's going to be set yet. So that's another thing I'll be, working out this week. So hopefully.
How about Karatha? Just as a little.
How about Karatha? No. Oh, it could, but have I been to Karatha?
Mining town.
Yeah.
My main
character is working in Melbourne or Sydney. She's in publishing. Okay. It's going to be somewhere else. But anyway, back to your book. I want to know, have you got a beginning apart from the fragments?
I don't, but I guess I trust the magic as well. I wait until I feel the high tide mark rising.
Yeah, that's a good way.
And it's very much rising at the moment. So it's actually it's a bodily feeling for me, and I can feel that high tide mark starting to creep. And the moment at which it peaks is when I literally, whatever I'm doing, if I'm at home, I will stop and I'll start writing. And it just comes out. And it's been the same with every single book. And I love that.
I do. It's interesting that you say that whole peak thing because I often think, I am going to plan more than I usually do. I've been listening to this for a while. I'm not a huge planner, but I always think I'll try and do it much. And I've realized that never works. And I always get not bored exactly, but I always get itching to write. So I guess that's similar to that. What do you call it? the
The
tide.
high
Like,
tide mark, yeah.
and then I just go, oh well, let's just dive in. So yeah, I'm excited. This week we're both going to be starting, and I think that's an exciting. A new page is daunting and
Yeah.
exciting.
Well, yes, this is the first time we've been writing at exactly the same
You're
time.
going to finish before me. I can absolutely tell you that. When is yours due?
1st of October.
Yeah, see, my publisher's being knows that I'm such a slowpoke these days, so it's not due till the end of the year. But yeah, I'm basically away. I'm away a lot of August.
You are traveling a lot
Oh,
for
and then
reasons.
I'm in October. I will be promoting. I've got a book coming out again, so that will
Yeah.
lose me about 3 weeks as well. So, yeah, I would like to get it done before the end of December. I'm planning on having a Christmas week off. We'll see if that happens.
Rach, you do need some time off. But
I know.
meanwhile, we have a guest today, and she's in our waiting room, and she's also someone who manages a lot of different deadlines because it is Allison Tait who writes as A.L. Tait, and
Love
she's
Allison
an
Tait.
internationally published best-selling author of 12 middle grade novels, including the fantasy adventure series, the Mapmaker Chronicles, the Ataban Cipher novels, and the Maven and Reeve mysteries. Her first contemporary middle grade novel, The First Summer of Callie McGee, was published in 2023 and longlisted for the 2024 Margaret and Colin Roderick Literary Award.
Lovely.
Allison's latest middle grade novel, Willow Bright's Secret Plot, is out now from Scholastic, with Danger Road to follow on the 1st of July. Allison is a multi-genre writer, a creative writing teacher, and speaker with many years' experience in magazines, newspapers, and online publishing. Some of you will know her as the co-host of the top-rating podcast, Your Kids Next Read, and the former co-host of the So You Want to Be a Writer podcast. So I'm going to put us on pause and I will bring Allison in. Rachel and I both know Allison very well, so this conversation may go off the rails. We'll see what happens.
Yay! I love a conversation going off the rails.
But
Hi, Ali. Oh, I was going to say Allison, Ali Tate, whatever.
You can call me
Hey,
Ali.
Tate.
I'm happy with Ali. Rach, we know each other well enough that you
I
can call me.
know.
I've got to say, it's a very select group of people that
I
get to
was
call
gonna
me Ali.
say,
It's
I
very
don't
small,
know. I
but you
think
can
as
be
soon as
one
the
of them.
AL, I just suddenly, I don't know if I've ever called you that, but yeah. Anyway, Sophie, you
Hi.
getting me saying that I will introduce and say hello to our wonderful guest. Hi, thank you for being with us.
hello, Allison. How are you?
Hi, Sophie. It's always very happy to see you.
It's so I should tell our listeners slash viewers that you and I know each other because originally, actually, the first time we met was because I was your agent.
You
So,
were, in
and
fact,
that's
my
going to
agent.
form
And
part
I
of
am
the conversation.
still, can I just say this? I am still weeping into my buckets that you are not my agent anymore. I remember when you said you were going off to be a nonfiction publisher. I was like, what? No, no,
No, you're not allowed
no,
to.
no, you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. I was devastated. But yes, that's okay. I'm fine, really.
Can I jump in quickly and ask be both a question? How did that happen? Did you submit to Sophie the written normal channels? And Sophie, what was it about Allison's work that made you go, yep,
Well, actually, Allison was one of 3 people who had written an anonymous book. Allison, maybe
We
you would
can't
have
talk about that. It's
Oh,
still anonymous.
still anonymous. I wasn't going to mention it.
I'm an online detective, so I'll be.
But
Yep.
look, it's in the midst of time now, and no one's ever going to know what that book was apart from me and Al. So there you go.
And the publisher, I
Secret.
assume?
Look, the person who commissioned it left the publishing company not long after.
Yeah,
that
they probably don't
commission.
remember it either. It was one of those
Wow.
ones that was just, yeah, it was just one of those projects that happened and then it was like it never happened.
But
Wow.
by then, Allison had done some ghostwriting, if memory serves.
I had, yes, I had done some ghostwriting. I'd actually written nonfiction at that point. I'd had a couple, I'm pretty sure my Stress Busters credit card book had been published at that stage. So I'd been working in magazines for a million years. I had written like a whole bunch of stuff. Nonfiction felt like a very natural fit for me. So I'd done a nonfiction book and then I met Sophie and then there was another nonfiction book that I think you repped Kate and I for that, didn't you? The Career Mums one. Did you do that
Yes,
one with
that
us?
sounds
Yeah.
familiar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that was my second nonfiction book, but I had already ghostwritten a couple of titles at that point as well as having my own
Wow.
nonfiction book out. I know, and I was desperately writing commercial fiction. I was writing, I'd started out writing romance novels,
That's where we
and
met.
yeah, and I
With
had
the romance.
wanted to be a romance author, and I won a mentor in a competition. It was quite funny. I won a mentor in a competition who just kept saying to me, it was, I mean, she was great because all she kept saying to me was, Allison, I think you need a bigger story. Allison, I think you need a bigger story. What she was saying to me now that I look back on it, because we're talking 20 years ago here, what she was saying to me was I wasn't focused enough on the romance to
Yep,
be a
yep.
romance author. Like I wanted to, I had so many things that I was trying to bring in. I had characters, I had all sorts of stuff going on. And I actually found that that was the most difficult aspect of romance writing for me, was that hyper focus on those two people and the feels, like it made a lot of sense to me to write romance because I had worked in women's magazines. I'd written for Clio and Cosmo and Vogue, and I'd done, all of that sort of stuff. So that market I understood well, and the voice I understood well. Like I kept getting great feedback because,
Yeah.
I could string a sentence together, and I had this, great kind of like that bouncy voice that goes with broadcast writing for magazines. But I could not get those feels right. And so then I started writing a bigger book. And that was when, Sophie and I sort of made our first foray into fiction, into commercial women's fiction, because I had completed this novel, which changed its title so many times I can't even remember the name of it.
And look, this was a question I was going to give to you later, but
Pink
we're here
Fibro
now.
House?
Pardon?
Was it Pink Fibro House or was that your blog?
No, that was my blog.
Right. Okay.
But I was living in the Pink Fibro when that particular book was picked up for publication. But I don't think I wrote most of it in before I moved, to the Pink Fibro. I'd written the first draft, at least, I think, from in Sydney, from memory. Yeah.
I forgot about the Pink Fibro.
I
Oh,
know. I
memories.
have so many facets to my life.
You
It's so
do?
exciting.
So I was going to, yes, ask about some things related to your kids' next read, but we have already arrived at the subject of the novel.
Yes, we can
And
save
so,
Your Kids Next Week because it's almost part two of my life. Like it's almost like my writing life is in so many stages. Actually, it's not even part two; it's probably like part 75. But we can get to that. So let's focus on the biggest, bleakest moment of my writing career. Let's just get that out of the way.
I'm
shall we?
laughing only because this was the stated subject of this conversation. As longtime viewers / listeners know, Rach and I like to have a theme / subject for our conversations, and so Allison suggested that we talk about what felt like at the time, I think, a catastrophe.
Horror.
For you.
A
Can I just say, I
catastrophe.
think it's very generous for you to share this, because so many people go through dark times and don't talk about it, and
Oh,
then
babe.
people just
Honestly,
think
as I
everyone's
say to
got good stuff.
I know, but as I say to people, it's like, I remember when I was doing the Life in a Pink Fibro blog, and I was writing a whole lot of writing sort of related posts because I was freelancing at the time and I was writing fiction. People wanted to know what I knew. So I was writing, various things. And one of the posts that I wrote was all about the key to a writing career. And at that time I was talking about freelance writing was developing a rhinoceros hide. And it is absolutely 100% the truth in freelance writing, in being an author, any kind of aspect of it. And I had a pretty good hide, well, I thought, in place because of working in magazines. Like I was completely used to handing a story over and just having it thrown at my head and being told to do it again because it wasn't right for whatever reason. So over the years of that, I thought that I was pretty good. What I didn't realize, and the thing that hurt, the thing that I think really, really took me apart, and we will get to the actual crux of this story
Yeah, yeah.
soon. The thing that really took me apart with it was how personal it was. I think the difference between having an article kind of, red pen through the whole thing, and having a novel red pen through the whole thing, was just the difference of you felt like your whole self was on the page, and particularly when it's your first one, which it was for me at that stage. It was the first thing that wasn't a romance novel, which, as we discussed, I couldn't do. But it was the first thing that I'd really felt was going to be something. And yeah, anyway, let's do the story, shall we,
So
Sophie?
the story, I will give some detail here because I was your agent. And so we'd already been working together on the nonfiction, as discussed. And you had this novel, and I thought it was great. And I won't go into all the details of who it was commissioned with, and why and what and wherefore, apart from saying that the person who commissioned it left the company
Yes.
while it was in production, basically, while the novel was in
Yes.
production. And this is
At the
actually
structural edit phase.
at
And
That's
that
where we
does happen
were.
a lot, right? That
Yeah.
happens. I hear that story so many times, but
Yeah.
not as drastic as what happened to you. But in some ways, maybe
it
better.
can happen. So this is this is also a story about the importance of individuals to the whole process. So when writers are wanting to get published, and when I was an agent, I used to say, look, planets have to align, and I still think that as a publisher, the planets have to align, and it needs to be the right person in the right publishing company at the right time, which seems like it's just so impossible to grasp when you have not had a book published. But that
No,
is the truth. It
it is
does
the
often come
truth.
down to the individuals involved, because someone has to respond to the author's material. It's not just about the agent saying you must publish this. It's actually that the commission
If
person
only.
needs
Yeah.
to respond. So we had someone who responded very positively, and there was a contract. Was there not, Alison?
There was a contract. There was a fully signed contract. There was much jubilation. Because I had my blog at that stage, and so I was able to kind of say that I'd received the contract and signed the contract, and all of these things were going to happen. And I was just beside myself because this had been a goal that I was working towards for a long time. And that's the other thing. I think that when you're very good at something, which I was at, writing freelance articles and writing for magazines, you forget that it took you 10 years to get that good at it. You forget that it was something that kind of built up over a long time. And so when I started writing novels, I just thought I was going to be great at it right from the beginning. And of course, again, we come back to voice was good, sentence structure was good, but I had no idea how to actually structure a novel. I didn't really, I mean, as a reader, I did, because you've read so many. So I had an idea of where all the beats needed to be. I did all that. I went to the Romance Writers Conference. I did all of the right things. But it was just that thing of recognizing that you need to learn how to write a novel the way that you write a novel, not the way that someone else writes a novel. And that took time as well. So, the contract was just like the biggest day of my professional life, because it was me reaching a goal that I'd set for myself, and the kind of goal that you tell people that you're going to write a novel and you're going to get that published. And even when you are someone who writes all the time, everyone goes, yeah, look, it's really hard. It's just great that you've finished the manuscript. No one actually believes that you're going to get it done. Not really, and even you sort of wonder some days if you're going to get it done. But I did. I got it done. I got the contract. And then, dun, dun, dun.
And I should also say at this point, so as an agent, because I had an editorial background, I was giving some editorial feedback, but my
Mm,
job as an agent was not to structurally edit, or I felt was not to structurally edit a manuscript to within an inch of its life, because the publisher or commissioning editor would have opinions. And so I could impose my editorial opinion on it, but that wouldn't necessarily be right for the author or for the manuscript. So therefore I used to look at the manuscripts and think, well, is there something I should be telling the author so that we can make sure it's in enough of a state to submit to
sell.
publishers, but not overcooked. So
Yeah.
I don't want to go so far down the line that it feels like it's just completely done or done in a way that someone else doesn't like. I was always quite mindful of trying to not impose my opinion. So this manuscript I felt was in excellent shape. The fact that it was commissioned indicated that, and then yes, went into the structural edit. And Allison, take it away again.
Okay, so at that point, I did do a structural edit with the original person who had bought the manuscript. And as I was working my way through the notes of that structural edit, we got the announcement that that particular publisher or editor was going to be leaving the company, and that my book was going to be taken up by another publisher within the company. And I sort of thought, oh, okay, whatever, not realizing quite what effect that this could have. Because what then happened was I did the structural edit to the notes that I'd received. And it was really hard for me, because the other thing that you don't recognize or understand, and you guys have probably forgotten too, is that when you receive that first structural edit, it is the most mind bending experience of your life, because what you realize is that what you have is good. Like, it's good enough to get you over the line, but the amount of work that you are going to need to do on this thing to actually bring it up to a publishing standard, and and in areas that you didn't expect. So I think what happens when you go into that is you think that, oh, maybe they're going to want me to, move the commas around, or, I didn't really understand what was involved in a structural edit, and I didn't understand that it was going to involve me rethinking some aspects of my characters, rethinking some aspects of my story, having to dive much, much deeper into areas that I hadn't expected, because to me, they weren't important areas in the story. But as I read the feedback, once I'd got over the vomiting hysteria of the first read through, once I read through it, I could see what she was saying. I could see where it was going. So I went through very carefully, and I contacted my dear friend Allison Rushby, who is a very well, and had at that stage, I think, already done about, I don't know, 20 books or something. I mean, she's up to about 30 now. But and I just said, I don't know where to start. And she goes, just start with the small stuff. Start with the stuff that you can actually just do. And
Right.
that will take you deep into sections that you hadn't really thought about. And that's going to allow you to kind of stretch out from there. So I did all that. And then it went back into the arms of a new publisher who I think, I mean, I just feel like there was one of those conversations that went on behind the scenes that you now know about, because you've been involved, with this stuff for long enough, that was essentially like, why did we buy this? Like, that was kind of the
Yeah.
impression that I received. And they said to me, look, we're going to need to do another structural edit. And I was like, oh, is this usual? I was thinking. And Sophie was like, well, she's very good. She was cheerleading and holding my hand the whole way through. This happens sometimes, and you've got a new editor and blah blah blah. So I got the notes from the new editor, but the new editor was a freelancer. She wasn't actually on staff, which is it's something that happens a lot. It wasn't someone that I had ever really I had no knowledge of, connection with, nothing. I hadn't obviously, in the original contract and with the original discussions, I had sort of had emails back and forth with the original person. And the structural edit I got from that editor was a complete and utter rewrite into what would have been an entirely different book. And I really panicked at that point. And I did attempt it, because I am a very good freelance journalist, and I'm a good journalist. So when an editor says to you, this is not right, what you do as a journalist is you rewrite it. So I, just being in that sort of mind frame, I just set about rewriting this thing. And I got to the end of it, and I had fallen out of love with the whole thing, and they were still struggling. Like, it had gone back into them, and they were still struggling with it. And it was at this point that Sophie probably saved my life and my career at this point, because she said to me, as part of our discussions about this, when I was, freaking out and panicking, she said to me, Allison, is this the book that you want to be your first novel? Because you only get one. And I thought about that later, and I thought about the impact of that first book. And now, having been in the publishing industry for, 10, 12 years now, I understand how the importance of that question is actually even more apparent to me now than it was then. Because I think if you put a book out in your first instance that you don't fully, wholly, and solely believe is the best thing that you can do, I don't know how you then build a career on that. I don't know how you go forward from that point. And so I said no. And at that point,
Yeah, what happens then? I'm like,
that's when Sophie, the super agent, swings into action.
Yeah, and I look, my memory's actually kind of hazy. I think I was pretty upset as well.
Yeah,
So
it was
I
really
blocked a lot of it,
upsetting.
but
so hang on, the book wasn't rejected then. It was already in the process, but
it
you
was in the
decided.
process. But I look, from my perspective, I was concerned because I thought I did not want Allison to be published by people who were not
Someone who
passionate
was
about what
ho-hum
she'd
about
done.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and also I had seen at another publishing company authors who had gone through structural processes where they had been asked to make the book into something that it was not. And I actually fundamentally object to this sort of behavior by publishers. I'm not a publisher who does it, obviously, because I object to it. But when you commission something, knowing what it is, when it's fiction and you have a complete manuscript, and you then turn around in a structural edit and say, we'd really like you to make it a completely different book, I think that's a betrayal of the author.
Yeah,
It's
I agree.
unconscionable, because if you felt that way about it, you should have said it well before a contract was signed, and you give the author the opportunity to say yes or no. The author may say yes. They may say, you know what, I really want to be published by you. Yes, I'm totally up for that. And then it's a separate question as to whether they can do it, but they know what they're getting themselves into. But when you've commissioned it, even if the person who's commissioned it has left, and then the people who inherit it don't look at that and say, well, our former colleagues saw something here, and we're going to honor that, and we're going to get to know the author, because that's the other thing. This is about the relationship between the author and the publisher. Get to know that author, find out why she's wanted to write this. And if this is not the right story, then maybe we actually see if she wants to write a different story, not try to over knead the dough of this story, because this is what can happen, is that you get all this different feedback. And this is, so Allison diligently went about trying to rewrite that novel the way she was told to, that second structural edit, and she didn't end up liking it because, you know, she had overworked the dough, basically. It was no longer the novel that she had wanted to write. It was a completely different story. And you know, when you're an agent, you've got to walk the line of what do I think the author wants here? What is the publisher trying to do here? Because I want to preserve the relationship if I can, at the point at which the relationship seems to be
broken,
irretrievably broken down, for whatever reason, then as the agent, my priority will always, like the priority the whole way along, is protecting the author. But sometimes that does mean accommodating the publisher, if that makes sense, because trying to preserve the relationship. But in this case, it was like, this is just far too distressing. So then you have to go back to the publisher and say, look, this relationship's not working, and we think the contract needs to be terminated. And the signature advance will be handed back.
No. You talked them into letting me keep it. She was so good. She was like, she goes to me, I said to them, I think Allison has acted in good faith and has had every single expectation that this novel would be published. So we'll be keeping the section of the advance that you've already paid us, and we will terminate it.
Fair.
I was like, okay. So,
and I would do that again if it was the same circumstance, because you had done more than enough.
I had done so much work on it. And I think that was the other thing. Like I just felt like it was that horrible feeling of like, I'm doing everything I can here and I'm failing. I just felt like I was failing, you know, and it was terrible. But, you know, the other thing about it was that that novel that I had written that novel. I had, you know, Sophie, I had submitted it to Sophie. I'd done some work on it and she'd sent it out. And in the interim of that, I had also written a second one. Like I had another whole 90,000 word commercial women's fiction manuscript just sitting there, like it was,
I remember that one too,
at about second draft stage, that one.
Wow.
And so there was just that sense of like, oh, I just, you know, didn't know what to do. But I'd written that second one, and while that was all going on, because this process of structural edits and backwards and forwards, etc., had taken a really long time, and I'd done the second one and it was complete. And then I said to Sophie, oh, you know, like, because the thing, I think it's probably, it's important to recognize at this point that I'm one of those people that's always writing something. So I had written, like, you know, I'd written 3 romance novels that hadn't been published. I'd written this first commercial fiction that had been picked up. I'd written the second 90,000 word novel that was also sitting there. I had all these complete manuscripts just like hanging around on my computer. And then I said to Sophie, well, you know, because I was still waiting for the next bit of the structural edit to come back. I'm like, what should I work on now? And should I start another novel? And Sophie goes to me, well, you don't have any middle grade, do you?
Wow.
I was like, no, I've never written for children. I've never had any desire to write for children. Oh, but I do have this random idea about map makers. And she was like, all right, well, what's that all about? And I said, I don't know. And she said, well, you should, I said, I don't know. And she goes, well, can you send me an outline? And I said, no. And I'll have to write it for you. So I spent sort of, you know, 6 weeks while I was waiting for feedback and things like that. I spent 6 weeks blasting out the first draft of what would become the first book of the Mapmaker Chronicles. So,
wow.
so
Having
weirdly,
read that to my sons, Well, one of them at least, back in the day. I can't believe you did that, like all that thinking in 6 weeks and worked the first draft
It
out.
was just okay. So that there's it's an interesting story that, but like just to finish off on the
Yeah.
manuscript. So when the terrible news came through that I wasn't going to have my first book and it wasn't going to be my first novel, what I did have was a complete children's manuscript. I had a complete children's manuscript, and Sophie had read it at this point and had said to me, "You need to take the whole middle scene out." Remember that? Remember that conversation? Because I'd had a point of view switch, and you were like, "No, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Whatever information is in that sort of 20 pages in the middle of that book, it needs to go somewhere else." And I was sort of working away on that, and so yes, it was absolutely like devastating, that first novel situation. But I think the fact that I think the fact that I am like that I always do have something else on the boil, the fact that I had something different to offer as well, I think was really important. And I think what I discovered in writing the Mapmaker Chronicles was that I found my way into story in a way that I did not find my way into story writing for adults. So when I was writing for adults, there was always that sort of like women's magazine training. It's always there. It's very hard to get rid of when you're writing in that sort of space for a similar sort of market. And so I found it was more about what I wanted to say. Like that, it was about what I wanted to say and the kind of, and it was about moving people around a chessboard to do that sort of thing. When I wrote the Mapmaker Chronicles, it was just purely, wholly, and solely about writing a story. And I
Mm.
think that's where I found my writing voice. Like I feel like the ability to be able to lean into that is what helped me, find my writing voice and has led me to a whole, part two of a writing career.
Yeah, wow.
And I don't know, I can't remember if I thought there was a gap in
People were
children's.
asking for it. I remember you
Yeah.
saying that to me. Like, so at the time, the middle grade market, children's market, so we're talking 13 or 14 years ago here. Like we're
Mhm.
back in
Wow.
2011. I think my I think my oldest son was about 8 or 9 at the time, and he's now 21. So that's how long ago it
Yeah.
was.
This last
And
year's feel like they've gone quick, hey?
Yeah.
I know. But it was that sort of idea of you were saying to me, I think because you knew I had kids, you were thinking maybe she's done something. And I was like, no, gosh, no, I'm not writing for those people. I'm reading a lot. But what I was doing was reading an awful
Yeah.
lot of it because I was reading aloud to them. And I was, and because my oldest son, known as Book Boy, was a very advanced reader. And so from the age of about 6, I was having to read the middle grade because I needed to know if it was suitable for,
Yeah.
a 6-year-old to read. So I'd read a lot of it.
Such a better mum than me. Because my son, we had kids about the same age, and my son was the same in reading quite high as like Ali Alan. Why am I calling you that? ALs. Anyway,
Because you love me.
I do, Ali. I quit. Anyway, and so I remember we used to talk about, books and stuff like that, but yeah, I didn't read any of them. He just read them.
Well, I read them. I mean, I guess the thing is, I'm also one of those, in the same way that I'm constantly writing, I'm also constantly reading. And I am one of those people that I read really fast. Like
I should say I don't. I read slow. Some of the books I did
that's
read,
the
we read at
difference.
night. We read at
Yeah.
night as well, but I
Yeah.
couldn't ever read all the books that he was reading because he is
Yeah.
really fast too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I read really fast. So I was able to read a whole lot of stuff. So Sophie was saying, that publishers are looking for middle grade. Like it's hot right now. Have you got anything? Well, no. But, in 6 weeks, I could have some.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah,
And
it's
I
just such
just
a great story of just resilience and changing, direction and being prepared to rebrand and think differently.
Well,
and I'm
I think it's also about not necessarily. I think it's about writing what you think you should be writing, and
Yeah.
not necessarily writing the thing that that is actually where you should be. Like I was writing what I thought I should be writing, and it
Same.
wasn't until I started writing middle grade that I really hit
Just right.
voice that
Yeah.
has worked so well for me. So yeah.
Well, and I did have an instinct, and I do work a lot of instinct, but I knew you were a great writer, and I knew you had the storytelling instinct, and I'd seen that you could write different types of things. You were writing nonfiction, you'd written fiction, I knew you'd ghostwritten, all sorts of stuff. So, and you wrote articles, so that suggested to me that you could turn your hand to yet another form of writing. And when I saw the outline, I remember looking at it, thinking, "This is it. This is the one."
Oh yeah, it was one and again, and it's all about. It's about listening to your instincts, because I had a conversation 6 months prior to that discussion. This is where the random idea about I had a conversation 6 months prior to that with Book Boy, and a couple of conversations that came together, and I remember saying to him, "Oh, that would be a great story about map makers. Someone should write that." And it never occurred to me at that
Yeah.
at that point that it would be me, because I didn't think I could. It wasn't what I wrote. It wasn't where I was. I'd never written, for children. I mean, I wasn't even the person who wrote picture books for my kids. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I wasn't doing that. It wasn't where I was, because I was very much in that headspace of writing, all of the articles and things like that. So yeah, so it came as a real surprise to me to discover that it was actually the most fun I had ever had writing anything. It
Wow.
was, yeah, very fun, very fun.
That's so good.
And I think that was all you needed to know, right? And now here you are, many middle grade novels later.
And from
Yes.
what, yeah. As I say, I can see why you're upset that Sophie is no longer agenting.
Oh, I know. Honestly, so good. She was so great. And we just had, it's just, the thing with agents, and I think it's really important that people understand this, is that the thing with agents is a good agent is the best thing you will ever have. A great agent is the best thing you'll ever have in your life. An agent that is not that great a fit for you is actually not. It's actually
Yeah.
it can be an incredibly difficult and very frustrating relationship if it's not
Yep.
the right relationship. So I knew that having found such a great relationship, it was going to be not easy for me to kind of replace that. Hence, I was basically like holding onto her ankles, begging her not to leave me. I think at that point, but yeah, so
Did
it's
do
an
you have
interesting
another
one.
agent now?
No, I don't. No,
No.
I haven't had one since. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I haven't got an agent either.
Mm.
I did have one for many, many years. But we parted ways last year, and yeah. Anyway, that's just I'm curious. Yeah, so thanks.
Yes. That's possibly a story for another day.
Yeah, it might be actually.
But also, Alison, you haven't needed one because you have been able to place your novels with publishers. So writers who are listening might be interested to know
How you did that.
how you've done that without an agent.
Yeah, that's an interesting story as well, because I think it I think it comes of well, okay, so there's a couple of things at play. So when pretty much around about the same time as the first Mapmaker book came out, I started doing a podcast with Valerie Khoo at the Australian Writers Centre called So You Want to Be a Writer. It was one of the kind of first in the space in Australia. It
Great
was
podcast, yeah.
massive, like it was a really big
Was.
thing. And we did weekly podcasts. I did 492 episodes of that
Oh my
podcast
God.
over
Amazing.
7 years. And it was, for me, like it was, because obviously for me the interviewing is always, I love interviewing, and I love interviewing authors. And for me it was like I did like a PhD, a master's, and I think I don't even know what comes after that, in writing, in publishing, and in everything else through the interviews of that podcast. I met a lot of people, I did a lot of networking, a lot of people knew who I was. And so I had the
Yeah.
Mapmaker Chronicles series come out, and it was very successful. The
Mhm.
Audubon Cipher novels, which followed, did well. They weren't as successful, but they were in that same sort of, fantasy adventure space. I actually think they are better books. I think they are among the best books I've ever written, those particular novels. But, for whatever reason, they didn't hit, the market, in quite the same way. And so then if you look at my timeline of my publishing, there's actually a gap. Like there's a bit of a gap there, because I had tried, the thing about me is that, like, in much the same way as I'm always writing, I'm writing the story that I want to write at the time. So I'm not thinking about like what's the market doing.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about what do I want to write today. So the next books I wrote after um, the Audubon Cipher novels were the Maven and Reeve mysteries, but they took me a while to place them because they weren't that they were a slight step up in age from the Mapmaker Chronicles and the Audubon Cipher, and my publisher at the time, wasn't that interested in more of that, and so basically through networking and friendships that I've made, I had various contacts in publishing, and I submitted the Firestar myself to those people and waited to see if anybody would be interested. And fortunately, Penguin Random House were interested in those. Now, they were just unfortunately the victims of timing. They came out in 2020 and 2021. They were
Ah.
9 months apart, and they were both right in the middle of the COVID lockdowns.
Mm.
You couldn't have been it couldn't have been worse in so many ways. So again, you have these characters who you adore and these stories that are, they were straight detective stories set in in a sort of almost history medieval style world, knights and castles, and again, like really fun to write, quite complex, quite complicated. I had loved writing them. They are such interesting stories, and me trying to figure out how to actually bring particularly when you don't plan, like I don't, me trying to figure out how to solve these complicated mysteries that I'd set up, throughout the writing process, wasn't overly easy, but I was glad I got there. And I got there in really, I think the thing when you don't plan, you get there in really unexpected ways. So I was
Yeah.
as surprised by who'd done it as I think the readers are. But I
Love that.
had also, before I placed those stories, I'd also started writing a contemporary novel. And again, because it was contemporary, it wasn't what A.L. Tait did. My two publishers at that point were like, oh, but it's not A.L. Tait, it's not fantasy, whatever. So I had this lovely little story that just sort of sat there. And then I sort of was thinking about what to do next. And I had written, and I've got anybody out there interested, I've got a whole nother middle grade fantasy novel, complete, ready to go. But I also thought, you know what, I want to try, and I'm actually interested in doing other things now. So I at that point, again, through networking, through all the various things, um, contacted a publisher at Scholastic that I had got to know through writing and going to various things. And I said, look, I've got a contemporary novel. Are you interested in having a look at that? And she was like, yes, I am. And then, hello, Callie McGee, the first summer of Callie McGee. And so I've done my last 3 novels with Scholastic. They're all contemporary. 2 of them are out this year, one in May, Willow Bright's Secret Plot, and one in July, Danger Road, which is a cold case crime thriller, which is slightly different again. And then I've also just completed for Scholastic another novel, which will come out early next year as well. So I'm, just, and I have to say, I think Scholastic is a great fit for me because Scholastic publishes at about the rate that I write,
Right.
which
Wow.
is, you know.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? They publish a lot, or
They publish a lot, and they have, like they're open to publishing like more than 1 book a year from me.
yeah,
If I have 2 great books, then they are open to publishing 2 great books because they have the book fairs, they have
yeah,
huge
there's a lot of stuff.
amount of publishing slots that they use, and so it's the kind of thing where for someone like me who likes to write a lot, the ability to actually publish more than 1 book a year is actually pretty exciting as well.
This could be a challenge for children's authors in that a lot of you write across types of children's books.
Yeah.
There might be picture books, middle grade,
Yeah.
YA, fantasy, contemporary, all sorts of things. And it is often the case that the publisher of one type will only want you to publish or write
Yeah.
that type of book, and
Yeah.
they may not want more than 1 a year. And so I do think it's a bind for kids authors who tend to be more on the prolific side than the non-prolific side.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's fantastic that Scholastic is the right home.
Yeah, it feels good, and they have been fantastically supportive. And I mean, at the end of the day, uh, all the publishers I've worked with have been great. The first one, let's just like move that aside and forget about it. But publishing is actually just full of really, really good people, and that's
Mm.
the thing that you come to realize. They're not trying to keep you out. They're not trying to make your life difficult. They want to publish books, and like chances are they want to publish your book if it's the right book at the right time in the right place.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that if anyone's listening, for whatever creative endeavor they might have, or even if they're just thinking about certain things, the main points to take out of your trajectory, for lack of a better term, are that we can get really attached to the shoulds. I should write that sort
Yeah.
of book because I
Yeah.
think I know what I'm doing. And so that was you trying to rationalize your way into being a certain type of author. When you
Yeah.
actually went with what you felt would be better for you, that's when you started to flourish.
Mm.
Yes, most definitely. And I think the other thing too is that you what the other thing I've realized as I've like learned more about writing, because every time you write a book you learn more about writing books. um you you get the book that that's coming out, July, Danger Road. It's a cold case crime thriller for middle grade readers. It has all of the hallmarks of an adult crime novel, but it has the distance and the step back that you need to make it suitable for a tween middle grade, and it's firmly middle grade. That's the other thing about Scholastic. It's always got to be like, if it's going to
Really?
go on the grade 6 book fair list, then it has got to be that kid can take it home and it's not going to have anything too troubling in it. So it gives you the challenge of that, but it
Yeah,
also
that's a big
gives
challenge with a
it
cold
is a
case.
huge challenge with a cold case. But I don't think I could have written this book 10 years ago. I
Mm.
couldn't have. I don't think I would have been able to put it together, and I don't think I would have been able to get it's a dual point of view. There's two brothers. They're 15 months apart and they've grown up in the same house, so the differentiation between those
Yeah.
two character voices is actually really challenging, and that's something that you have to think about each time. When with the characters, you're thinking about, how would this character say this, how would that character, because they're going to say the same things but they need to say them in different ways.
Yeah.
um, and I don't think I would have been able to do it 10 years ago, but now I can do it. And now I think to myself, well, okay, if I can do this for middle grade readers, if I can write cold case crime for middle grade readers, then surely, Alison, it's time to rethink the adult fiction. Surely.
Ah,
Maybe.
Interesting. We get around to that. Wow.
Maybe. I don't know. Like, I don't know, but it would depend on the story, because you're only ever going to write the story that goes with the idea that you have at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Yeah.
well,
But
in fact,
yeah.
Alison, before you came into the Zoom room, we were talking about which idea Rachel was going to use to start her next novel. So, there
Ah.
you
Yeah.
go.
Oh, well, which I know what the idea of the novel is.
Oh no, yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
the idea
yeah.
of the first scene.
I've only had it, like, usually I have an idea for longer, and this has come about quite quickly, so I don't know what the first chapter is going to be. That's what we were saying, kind of thing. But yeah.
Well, jumping off, diving in,
Oh,
find your character.
so that's what I'm not worried. Like, I now, as you said, we learn so much in writing each book, and I know that it will come to me. Once I sort of throw myself into the plan, not the planning, because I don't plan either, but I do like a bit of character work, and just thinking, like, I want to work out where this is set. There's a few
Yeah.
things I need to work out. So that kind of stuff. I feel like as I sort of think about that this week, it'll come. But
But
yeah.
it's actually, for me, it's the reason it's the reason you do it, right? It's the main reason I show up at my desk is for these opening, ideas of figuring out how these bits and pieces are going to come
Fit
together,
together.
who's
Yeah.
going to tell the story, where it's set, and it's that the discovering of
Just
the
makes it fun.
story is
Yeah.
why I'm here. Like,
Yeah, I agree.
if I
But
didn't love that, I wouldn't be here.
I know that we are going probably off topic, but because you're not a planner
What a
either, and I'm
surprise.
not a planner, I'd love to know, what do you do, like, because I think there's a spectrum of everything with planning to plotting, right?
Yeah,
I'm
oh, definitely.
somewhere on that line. And I'm definitely towards the pantser end of it. But the more I write, I think the more I've got an idea of what's going on in my head, like more than I had probably when I first started pantsing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I think what you do learn the more books you write is that having a bit of an idea of where it's going is always a good idea,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
particularly if you're writing to a deadline, or you're writing like
Yeah,
with
exactly.
the Mapmaker Chronicles, those first 3 books, I had to do 3. I had written the first one. I had vague outlines of because Sophie said to me, "We're going to need to know what happens over the 3 books, or they won't buy
I know,
it."
I always hate this.
I'm I'm like, really? I don't know. All I can tell you is how it ends. And she's like,
Yeah.
no, we're going to lead a little bit more detail than that. But then it was a matter of, and I wrote the whole 3 books before the first one came out because I didn't feel I could go out and talk about the first one without having
Wow.
some idea of what was going to happen at the
Yeah,
end.
yeah.
But I guess where I start is generally with just now I'm trying to think about this. I'm just working on a new idea at the moment. I had an idea in my head of the kind of inciting incident and what happened at that point, and then I had the setting for the story came out of that. So then I knew where it was going to be set, and
Yeah.
from that point, I had to think about, because again, we're talking middle grade. So I had to think about, okay, why are kids in this? Who are they? And
Yeah.
what are they doing? So there's always got to be that kid thing. Like with the Audubon Cipher, I wanted to do this illuminated manuscript that was, clearly had to have been created in a monastery. And so I'm researching, like, why were kids in monasteries? Like, who
Yeah.
was there and why were they there and what would they be doing?
Yeah.
Which was an enormous amount of fun because then you start to, discover that, they had boxes out the front you could put your baby in if you couldn't look after them.
Oh.
Anyway, but I
Yeah.
digress. So then I start thinking about who the character is and what's their role in the story. And I know what the ending is. So I
Mm.
know I even as the inciting incident came up, I'm sort of like workshopping through my head, where's this going to go? How's it going
Yeah.
to end? So I know what the ending is. And then I've just got to write that,
Have you ever
55.
not known what the ending is?
Yes, with the Maven and Reeve mysteries, I didn't
Oh,
know
that's right. You
what
said.
the ending was. I didn't know who it was that had stolen the Fire Star until, in fact, I thought it was one person all the way through until I got to the end and was like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Which was actually really great because I had it, it allowed me to, like, because I had thought the whole time it was someone else, the red herrings were already set there for me. Like they were
Yeah.
all there because, like I just had to make sure that what I did need to breadcrumb that path to the actual person was there but buried. So yeah, so that
Wow.
was an interesting process. But yeah, I often start with a character. That's kind of where my real thing starts.
Same. Yeah.
I love the idea of you writing a mystery story and not knowing who done it. And I think this is a perfect illustration of how stories belong to us, but also don't. Because
No,
if you completely owned that story, if it was completely like a product of your brain cells, then you would have known from the start who done it. But instead, we pull them from the ether.
Yeah.
Yes, and they just come out of the circumstance and they come out of the decisions that the character makes and they come out of people that wander onto a page and you think, well, what are you doing here?
Yeah, exactly. Because I got started, if people have heard, when I broke up my high school sweetheart and started writing then. And I just had so much fun playing with that story. And I remember thinking, not that it really was a story, I remember thinking though, I want to do this. I want to be able to play God. Like I love playing God. And now I know we don't play God.
Yeah.
Like, because you can't actually just tell a character to do something because it suits your plot or whatever, because that will, totally feel contrived, or it'll send, it just doesn't work that way.
No.
Yeah.
And that is very much part of the fun.
Yeah.
So, Alison, as a byproduct or perhaps a direct product of your writing for middle grade readers, you are the host of Your Kids Next Read podcast.
Oh,
And
yes.
Huge.
and also the recent news for you and your co-hosts is
Yeah.
you're basically now publishers too. Tell us about that.
That's it. Yeah. So that's it. Yeah. Okay. So I'll give you the potted history of Your Kids Next Read. So as I said, I was co-hosting So You Want to Be a Writer for 7 years, and about 2016, early 2017, I had also started a Facebook community called Your Kids Next Read, and I'd started it with Megan Daly, who is a teacher librarian, and at the time was a highly successful blogger on a website called Children's Books Daily. And we'd met through blogging, as so many things happen through blogging. Blogging was actually like a fantastic incubator for so many different things. We'd met through that. I had, I think, so I was on to about my 4th book or something by then, but a lot of people were asking me about books for their kids. And I was also always looking for books for my kids. So I would be asking Megan, particularly, I think Book Boy at that stage was 12 or 13. And we were well and truly into the YA space. And a lot of it was, not particularly suitable. So I'd be sort of like asking her for suggestions. And I said to her, you know what, we should start a Facebook group, because if people are asking us and we're asking each other, then it means that there's a need for it out there. Because schools were taking and continue to take their librarians out of their schools. Indie bookstores were sort of closing down. People go to Kmart or Big W or wherever, and they look at the shelves and they just don't know where to start. So we started this Facebook group, and I thought it would be 200 people, but we are now 9 years down the track, and it's 39,000 people in the group.
Amazing.
I know. And so a couple of years ago, we started a podcast attached to it to take that conversation out of the group and more broadly. We have a website now. We have a newsletter on Substack. All of these things are called Your Kids Next Read. We're very easy to find. We have a third member called Allison Rushby, who's another children's author. We brought her in not about 6 months after we founded the group because it just grew so quickly, and we realized that we just couldn't manage the moderation, etc., of it by ourselves. So there's 3 of us. We run giveaways. We do all of the things, and then out of this has now also grown a book series called Your Next Read, which is coming out. It's launching in March next year. We've partnered with a firm press to create this series. It's across 2 different reading levels. There's a silver level for reading age of 5 to 8, and then there's a gold level for reading age of 7 to 9. So they're basically chapter books and then junior fiction. And what we want to do with it is create like a wide reading experience, because one of the things that we see a lot is kids will either get stuck not being able to find the next book because discoverability is it remains a massive issue. They'll get stuck, or they'll read the same thing over and over again. And, obviously the wide reading experience is important for all of the things, for, literacy, but also for your own writing, for everything. So this is just like a one-stop shop smorgasbord of stories, as I like to call it,
We love that.
which will be eventually by the end of 2027. There'll be, I think, 34 books across the 2 series.
Wow.
And obviously we'll see where we are at that point. But it's been fantastic for us because we've been able to be in from the ground floor. We've been able to talk about bringing in the creators, the authors and illustrators that whose work we love. We're promoting Australian authors. We are, because it's what we do. It's what we've done since we started. We've been in there sort of like spreading the word about Australian books. And I guess this is just a way for us to offer a curated reading experience that makes it easier for parents to go into those Kmart and go, oh, that'll be good because it's your next read. And there'll be a whole bunch of different stories. And kids get to get a sense of the kinds of stories they really like to read. And they may not be what people think they should be. And that's the other thing, it's that idea of we get people coming into the group who are like, I've got a 10-year-old boy. What kind of book should I get him? And everyone goes, right, first thing we need to know is, what does your 10-year-old boy like to do? What are your 10-year-old boys? Because they're not all the same. You can't just like have this mass amorphous kind of like 10-year-old boys like to read this kind of a thing. So yeah, so it's just sort of like it's a step out from where we've always been, the space we've been in for 9 years.
So if a writer is interested in being published in this imprint, how do they find you?
Well, at the moment, we've got a fairly set list for the first offering. We are going to open that up, going forward. It's at a firm press. Our publisher is Tash Besliev. So we've got a lot of plans, and we're sort of, in the process of sort of figuring out what those next things are going to be. But the launch books, there'll be 4 coming out in March next year. Then there's 2 in June. Then there's another 4, I think, in September. And then, like it rolls out from there. So we've been doing this we've been working on this under extreme NDAs for nearly 2 years now. It's been really hard to, it's a lot of work because we also want them to be, we want them, so they've brought the science of reading into the curriculum as the way to teach reading, and oldies like us will know it as, phonics. But this is an adjunct. So these are not readers. This is not sort of break it down. This is the learn to love literature aspect. This is the stuff that goes with it. So because of that though, there's also, we have to think really carefully about, the language used and how things go out and what they look like and all of that sort of stuff. So it's been a big learning curve and very exciting. Yeah, it's weird being on the other side of it, I have to say.
I can imagine. But yeah, that would be. Oh, I'm jealous. Being on
Well, I can see Rachel Johns presents or Rach and Soph present. Come on, people.
Soph already gets to present, so
We just need to get the more grown-ups reading as well.
Well, that's what we're trying to do as well.
Yeah.
Like we look,
You get them
the-
reading young, they'll
we
stay
have
with it.
many thoughts that we often go down our soapbox about the way that children's literature is actually looked at and treated in this, country across a whole range of different areas. There's not very much space given to it in the media. It's often discussed. Like there was an article that in the Saturday paper recently that likened a memoir to like being like YA, and as every YA author will tell you, like there's an enormous amount of work that goes into a YA novel, and to kind of denigrate it like that as they did. I mean, the whole review was questionable, but anyway, so there's an image issue, and we always talk about being the kids table at the wedding, because whenever we go to festivals,
the romance table isn't much better.
No, well, we get it would be similar. We get to go to the schools visits, and then they ship us out before the real stuff happens. Or if we do get to go to the launch event, they put us somewhere like way down the back where we won't disturb any of the other patrons. Like it's an interesting thing. But as we try to point out, we are growing the next generation of
I was going to say,
readers.
You're doing God's work for all of us.
Like
adults.
really, I should be Saint, right? Saint Allison, Saint Ali. Let me be Saint Ali from here on in.
Good.
But also
for all people that like.
I was going to say, Rach, there's a slight delay with you. I think is what's going on.
Oh, she's breaking up.
Oh, sorry.
You're back now. No, you're back now.
Oh, sorry. I won't speak. I was just going to say, with TikTok. What? Oh, it's too slow. You just talk.
I was going to say the attitude towards romance readers and children readers in general is about our societal attitude towards those groups of people. It's about how we value or not children and their opinions, even though we might prize children as trophies sometimes, dressing them up for social media, whatever. Their opinions are discounted in terms of what they like and want. Is what I'm gathering from that kind of attitude towards children's literature, because if you value children and teenagers, you wouldn't think that literature for children and teenagers is worthless.
So I also think there's an issue with people thinking that writing romance or writing for children is easier, like it's some kind of major cop-out. Now, as discussed earlier, writing romance is incredibly difficult. If you can't hyper-focus on those feels, which clearly Allison didn't get the feels gene, because I couldn't do it, it's not easy. And if you can't tap into that storytelling and you can't tell a sophisticated story in a way that is accessible for a 10-year-old and in language that is accessible for a 10-year-old, and if you can't think about your metaphors so that they make sense within that world, you can't be quoting Shakespeare, because they don't care. You've got to think about what makes sense to that kid. And if you can't think like that, then you can't write for children. Sorry, but
also kids are really blunt in their opinions, right? They like it or they don't like it.
Exactly, they're a hard market, and in some ways, like you're likening romance to children's fiction in another way, but it being hard to write. But also both markets, like kids are hard market because they know what they like and don't like. Romance readers read a lot, and they're not going to put up with someone who's just doing it for the
they can tell.
Oh yeah.
So whereas I think and I think I write general fiction too, not literary fiction, but what I'm saying is those readers don't read as much usually as, say, a kid might. If you've got an obsessed child reader, they will be reading multiple books a week, and romance readers in general are reading multiple books a week. Whereas in general fiction, it's a little bit less, they're not quite as gung-ho usually about.
Yeah, quite often. But just I was thinking, Allison, when you were talking about blogging and how you met Megan through blogging, I wouldn't be talking to either of you now on this podcast without blogging, because blogging is what I did when I started my country music life.
That's right.
And that was the discipline that led me to writing fiction.
Yes.
So yeah, that blogging, like I was on Blogspot at the time, which was Google's blogging platform.
That's where I started. I started on Blogspot as well. Life in a Pink Fibre started out on Blogspot. Yeah.
I think I had a Blogspot too, but I was not a voracious blogger like either of you.
I was. And the thing that I think, it gave me the discipline. I wrote every day on that blog for 2 years before I realized that I probably should just put all of those 365,000 words into my fiction. So there was that. that. But the other thing that I think blogging gave me, and I wrote a blog, I actually wrote a couple of blog posts about it, was when it came to that writing voice. So I was very used to the broadcast voice of magazines, which is fitting into a publication and a particular, it was almost like you click a switch and you're in that zone.
Yeah.
What I had to do with fiction, though, was to find my own writing voice. And I actually think blogging really helped me with that, because I would sit there and I would have to write about some tiny thing that happened that day. It didn't actually make sense, didn't have to do whatever, but I had to find a way to make it interesting. And so by doing that, it really helped me find my own writing voice. And I think that's what I brought, probably more so than my adult fiction. That's what I brought to the Mapmaker Chronicles. And I think that's what got me over the line with that as well as a series. Like, yes, we'll take 3 books from you. It's like,
Now, you mentioned that your kids' next read has a Substack newsletter.
yes, it
So
does.
you are dabbling in a different form of blogging platform, because I think three of
Yes.
us would agree that Substack is a form of blogging. How are you finding Substack? Because Rachel loves it and is using it to great effect. She now has a serialized novel that's taking place on Substack.
Yep.
I have a newsletter. How are you going with it?
Well, the Your Kids Next Read Substack is incredibly successful. We just roll along there beautifully. We use it for a free newsletter, which goes out obviously to the whole database. And we started it because again, I mean, people think like you've got some master plan for this stuff, right? But you don't. Trust me, you don't. It occurred to me a couple of years ago that we had epic numbers of people in this Facebook group, and we did not have contact details for any of them. And if Facebook fell over in the same way that Twitter did, we were not going to be able to actually, like, the whole thing would fall over. So I said to the others, we've got to start a newsletter. And they were like, oh, we do not have time for something else, And I'm like, no, we have to, because otherwise everything we've done is for nothing. So as it turns out, we're still there on Facebook happily, but I'm so happy that we also have this other thing. So we do the 1 monthly kind of general overview, bit of an article about something useful in reading and books, updates, blah, blah, give away some books, fantastic, happy days. And then we do one post, which is a paid newsletter post. So we have a paid subscriber base as well, which is a tiny fraction of our free newsletters. But I'm fine with that, because what I realized, and something that I came to the conclusion of, that I should have come to the conclusion of a long time ago, is that you can't give away everything you know for nothing forever. And that's what I was doing. I mean, eventually with So You Want to Be a Writer, the podcast, Valerie and I created a book, So You Want to Be a Writer, the book, and that's for sale, and we still sell that to this day. But it was the same with Your Kids Next Read. It was like, how can I feel like I am not doing all of this work unpaid? And there is an expectation out there, I think, in some ways, that you will do that, and particularly in children's fiction. There's an idea that you're just there for the love of it, which clearly you are, because otherwise would I have started any of this? No. But there is also a sense of Allison needs to get paid sometimes. And so we have a paid subscriber base for that, which is just one post a month, and we take it in turns and write on different aspects, because we all have a different, bring a different skill set to it. So that's great. Yeah, I'm very happy with that. But I also still have my Allison Tait blog, which, I update way less frequently these days. I have my own Allison Tait newsletter, which I've had for, I just don't even know, way too many years. And I have to say that that's the thing I find the most chore. That's the chore. And I have been thinking about, would I put that on Substack? But I don't think I need another outward facing place to put content, because I have so many of those, and I wouldn't monetize it. It's not something that I would, get paid. So I wouldn't do a paid subscriber thing for my own author newsletter. So for me, it's like, if you're listening, please sign up to my newsletter at allisontait.com, because I need friends, and I need a reason to send it out I only do it quarterly now. I was doing it monthly, and I just thought, I write a lot. I write in all the places, and you just get to a point where you think, where can I pare this back? Because there's only so much of me to go around, and there's only so many different ways I can tell the same story. Because that's the other thing I try to do as a journalist background. If I'm going to put a story, say, okay, so Danger Road is coming out. If I'm going to put a story about Danger Road on the Your Kids Next Read podcast and on the blog and on my social media, I'm going to want those things to be different in some way. I'm going to want to give different information. And so when it comes to my newsletter, what am I giving my author people? What am I giving my absolutely lovely subscribers, some of whom have been with me forever? What am I giving them that's different and special? So I've got to think about that as well. I can't do that again on another platform.
I think if you've got your kids' next read and you're using that as well, like and so you should, as I've often said, I've got a book club with Anthea Hodson, and we've got a reasonably big platform, a Facebook group.
Yeah.
Not anywhere near as big as yours, but it's quite big. We're allowed to promote our own books in there, but we don't allow any other authors to.
No, and we do the same.
And so I think you've got such a huge platform.
Yeah.
I would think for you don't necessarily need to worry about, making extra for your book, for your newsletter. And, you could probably just send one.
I just feel, I feel a responsibility to those people in a way that I don't feel a responsibility to the broader network, though, because they have chosen my newsletter to sign up for. And as I said, some of them, over the years, and that's the other issue. Over the years, it's changed so much. Over the years, what I do has changed so much. So I have this sort of like rolling, my subscriber base tends to roll along up and down, because people that signed up for all of my writing content are not necessarily that interested in my, in my children's book content and in my podcast content. So, it's an interesting conundrum, and it's fascinating to me that it's always been probably the biggest sticking point for me, has been that. Maybe because it's where I feel like I'm self-promoting, when in everything else, there's always so many other people involved that it's not.
I don't think you should worry about self-promoting.
Well, no, honey, sweetie, darling, you got to get over that. You have to be able to love yourself sick and tell everyone how fabulous you are.
I know, but imagine after all these years, like, this is what's worrying me.
Well, exactly. Look at everything you've achieved, and you're worried about telling people that you're achieving stuff. Then we do need to have a serious chat.
That's why you should go on Substack. No. A lot of people there saying, just tell everyone how much. Like, I've been reading a few Substacks from people who are in the author promotion kind of business, and they're like, we need to all get over this fact that because
I get that, but I also know the thing with a newsletter is that you can see in real time the reaction to whatever it is you've sent out. If I send out something that is good news about my books, 10 people will unsubscribe.
Okay, well that's actually not to do with you. That's about them.
I get that. I know that, but and that's been forever. It's always been.
You know what? I think with kids fiction, maybe they're unsubscribing because their children are no longer in your.
Yes, entirely possible.
They're not a writer, right?
Let's look at it like that. Let's think of it. Let's think of it in that way.
I've unsubscribed to a few things because that I did with kids, over the years, and it's not that I don't think they're a worthy service or whatever. It's just that no longer
you're not in the zone anymore.
And so I don't want to be getting that email. So I think quite possibly that's sometimes for you.
We'll just go with that, shall we?
Yeah.
But also it's the fact that if doing that personal newsletters not working for you anymore, just migrate those people to your kids' next read, and they'll find out your news there because you're putting it out there anyway.
There then if they want to.
Because Rachel migrated all of her newsletter recipients.
That's that. Yeah. I've grown since there. Like, I've been there maybe 8 months. I don't know. Just since the end of last year or whatever. But I was constantly having to delete people that weren't opening stuff because I was going over that 2,000 mark and having to pay.
Yeah.
And now I've got 2,341 subscribers. So it's not a huge list compared to, I know, what some people have. But those are hopeful. Like, I've never done newsletter swaps or anything trying to get, newsletter things for the sake of it. I just want people to be there who generally want to, but it has gone up since being on Substack.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense because it's got that outward facing, it's content as well as a newsletter. So people can discover you in different ways. And I do see the value of it in that sense. But I'm
also,
not sure.
Though, I just had a thought. I guess as a kids writer, and tell me if I'm wrong, like, you're kind of, all your sort of promo to actual kids is done like through school events and like things like that or whatever. You're really promoting to parents.
I'm talking to adults, and that's the other thing. I'm always talking to adults. So
like, the parents, because the kids are not on Substack, right?
No, that's right. But that's the same with Your Kids Next Read. We're talking
Yeah.
to parents, carers,
Yeah.
we're talking to booksellers, publishers, lots of
I'm
teacher
just thinking the
librarians. We
newsletter
love
is
teacher librarians.
at parents. I mean, you've
Yep.
done a lot in the right, because one of the things I've often said is one of the reasons I was reluctant to start a Substack, and we probably should wrap up soon.
I was going to say, we could just sit here all night and have a
I
chat.
know,
couldn't we?
people are probably going, when are they going to stop? But one of the reasons I was reluctant to is because there seem to be so many people writing about writing, and I'm like, the world doesn't need another, so that was one of the reasons I was reluctant, but also because, like you, I'd been trying to send a newsletter out a month. That was what and it felt like a huge, big task, and I didn't know each time. And but for some reason, I sort of changed my mindset when I went to Substack, and my mindset's not completely changed. It's always been about the reader, not other writers. Like not that I'm against other writers. I hope I'm very supportive in different ways and stuff, but there's plenty of people teaching how to write, and I don't need to be necessarily one of them. So my target is the readers. And I'm still, I'm sure, like, I'm doing one a week at the moment, and I'm quite enjoying it, but I'm like, oh, is this too much? So I've actually asked tomorrow. But yeah, I don't know what I'm saying here, but I do get that it can be a chore.
Yeah, and you've got a clear audience, and you're speaking directly to your clear audience. Whereas with mine, it's as you say. So when I first started out, I was writing a lot about writing because that's what I was doing, and writers will follow newsletters about writing. But then you realize that all you're writing about is writing, and you're not actually you're not talking to readers, although writers are also readers.
Yeah, 100%.
So I guess my journey, if you want to call it that, has also been about sort of the change, having to kind of, changing horses. I'm changing horses. I'm doing different things all the time. And so it's sort of like, well, how do I change horses in the most glamorous and tutu-like way, jumping onto the next one, without sort of like falling down between them and being trampled in the mess. So I think it's an interesting challenge. I think every author comes across it at some point and questions, newsletters in particular, like, what are we doing? But I will never, ever overlook the fact that somebody giving you their email address is a gift. Like, they are trusting you that you're going to be interesting enough that they're going to let you in that door. And so to me, that is something that is really worth treasuring and something worth thinking about. And so I'm the same with the Your Kids Next Read newsletter. I try very hard to make sure that even just our monthly one is always interesting and always useful. Useful is a big thing for me, useful. So I'm always trying to do that. And I just find that with my author newsletter, it's not always easy to work out what the use is at that given time.
Ask them. As your former agent, my advice to you.
I know. I have asked them in the past. It might be time to ask them again.
You keep saying author newsletter. So you think that newsletter is primarily people who are following you as authors?
Yeah, they follow me from. It comes off most of the signups come off my website.
I understand what you're saying in terms of like, but you've been doing that for a long time, because I'm a subscriber, and I
know you and I have been
and stuff, right? But I don't think you owe anyone anything.
No,
I thought
right
now I'm actually focusing on something else. No,
it's not an owing thing, but I also recognize that it's a community. Like, it's a community of people, and it's also a community of people who they buy my books. Like, they do.
Well,
so
I'd say ask them. I would go on Substack, because it can be more of a community there.
I can't do it. I've got a blog. I'll just do it there. Just honestly.
Well, Allison, I think we're going to leave that conundrum with you, because we've had you talking for quite a long time. Thank you for sharing your horror story.
Anytime. Look at me. I'm quite blasé about it these days. But you can imagine the pain at the time, right? Well, you don't have to, Sophie. You were front row for it.
I can imagine it, but I just think, look at you now, and look at all the different things that's opened up. So who knows what would have happened if, that.
Well, I just think the worst thing I could have done would have been to be like so devastated that I didn't write anything else ever again. I think that, but I also think I was saved by the fact that I'm always writing. Like, I was saved by that. So my thinking on it is always like, if you've written something that you love and you think is going to be your thing, send it out, do what you have to do, write the next thing, get on with it, do the next one.
Very good advice.
Keep writing, keep reading, as you also said.
Absolutely.
Well, Allison, we're going to leave it there. I'm sure we'll have you back at some point in the future, because I think this podcasting Rach and I are doing is a going concern, We seem
And
to.
there's so much to talk about with you.
Well, you should get me back for let's do podcasting 101 next time, because I've got
Ooh.
so many thoughts. I've been across
Oh.
all of the podcasts, as you know.
I would love
Okay.
to chat about podcasting.
Okay, well, I'm going to put that on the list as soon as I put us on pause. Allison, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks so much.
So
Wow, we talked a long time.
we did. And Allison and I saw each other in person not that long ago, because we do catch up from time to time. She doesn't live in Sydney. She lives just a bit south of Sydney.
Yep.
So if she's in town and she has some spare time, then we will catch up then. So it's always great to see her. Obviously, we parted on good terms as agent and client.
Yeah.
But
Although I think she would rather you still were an agent. It sounds like you were such a good agent from what I've heard from a few people that, you know.
Oh, well, thank you. I do prefer, though I have to say. I like making books, and I think that's true of me being an author as well. Like I as an agent, I missed making things, and so it was an important realization that part of my nature is fundamentally that I like making things.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Oh, well, I think hopefully that's a useful chat for anyone listening, because I've heard so many stories, not exactly like Allison's. I think that's the first time I've actually, no, I've heard of other people sort of, you know, taking their rights back after, you know, or cutting the contract short kind of thing, but not before they've actually been published.
And we had Sally Hepworth telling us her story of having a whole manuscript rejected before it even got to an editorial stage. Yeah. So
and one of the things I think Allison said then is about, you know, or maybe it was in the intro, but being you know, rushing, like we all want to get published, but sometimes, you know, it pays to take a breather and think about, you know, whether pathway. Yeah.
Well, Rach, I'll see you again soon. I'm very, very sure about that.
Okay, me too. See you later.
Thank you, listeners/viewers. We will see you down the road.
Thanks. Bye.